AITA for ruining my sister's wedding by telling the truth about my fiancé. This has been a whirlwind of emotions for me, and I still can't tell if I'm the villain in this situation or if my sister and her new husband are just overreacting. I, 28F, have always been close with my older sister, Laura, 32F. We grew up in a very traditional household, and while we had our sibling arguments, we've always been supportive of each other. Laura has been engaged for 2 years to her fiancé, Mark, 34M, and their wedding was this past weekend. I'm still reeling from everything that happened. To give some context, I've been dating my fiancé, Eric, 29M, for almost 3 years. Eric and I met in college, and while he's incredibly charming, I've always known he has a complicated past. Nothing criminal or dangerous, but he has a history of emotional manipulation and lying, mostly in previous relationships. I discovered this when a close friend of mine dated him for a brief period before me and told me some things I didn't want to hear. At the time, I thought I could handle it and that he had grown from those mistakes, but I never shared this information with anyone, including my family. Laura's wedding was a big deal. It wasn't just a small ceremony. It was a lavish event with over 200 guests, a fancy venue, and a huge budget. I was, of course, a bridesmaid, and I had been involved in some of the planning. Everything was going smoothly until the night before the wedding rehearsal. I had been feeling uneasy because Laura's new husband, Mark, had a friend, Jake, who I had a negative encounter with in the past. Jake was known for being very manipulative and for dating multiple women at the same time. He had dated me briefly before Eric, and while nothing serious happened, I remembered some red flags and was nervous about him being around. The night before the rehearsal, I confided in Laura about Jake, hoping she would be aware of some history because she was very close to Mark in his circle. Laura seemed skeptical, but said she appreciated my honesty. I assumed that was the end of it. Fast forward to the wedding day. Eric and I were at the venue early to help with final preparations. While I was checking the decorations, I overheard Mark talking to Jake about Eric in a surprisingly negative way. Mark said things that suggested Eric had cheated on me in the past, and that he was not to be trusted around women. I was shocked because I had never heard this from anyone, and the way he said it made it sound like a fact, not a rumor. I didn't know what to do. I knew confronting Mark in front of everyone would ruin the day, but I also felt compelled to protect my sister from what I believe could be a major disaster. I quietly told Eric what I overheard, and he was furious. He insisted that Mark had no proof and that I had no reason to believe him. I tried to calm Eric down, but he was pacing and muttering about how this could destroy our reputations. About 30 minutes before the ceremony, I ran into Laura backstage. She looked stressed but happy, and she asked if everything was okay. I panicked and blurted out everything I had overheard. Mark talking about Eric, Jake's past behavior, and my concern that there might be some interference in her wedding day. Laura froze. I tried to explain calmly that I only wanted her to be aware that I wasn't accusing anyone of anything definitively, but the damage was done. Laura left to confront Mark, and within 10 minutes, a huge argument broke out in the bridal suite. Guests started noticing, and whispers began to circulate. Mark accused me of spreading lies about him and his friends, and Laura accused me of ruining the surprise and making a scene. Eric tried to defend me, but in the chaos, even his protests seemed like adding fuel to the fire. The ceremony was delayed by nearly an hour. When the wedding finally started, the atmosphere was tense and awkward. Laura looked distraught. Mark was visibly angry, and several guests told me later that it was the most uncomfortable wedding they had ever attended. Afterward, Laura and Mark didn't speak to me for the entire reception. They left early, and I felt horrible, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that I had done the right thing. I didn't lie or fabricate anything. I told the truth about what I had overheard and what I knew. I just didn't anticipate it exploding in such a public way. Now, a week later, my sister has unfollowed me on social media and refuses to answer my calls. Mark has blocked me entirely. Eric is still upset because he says I embarrassed him in front of the entire wedding party, and I'm struggling with guilt. My parents are torn. They understand why I acted the way I did, but are disappointed that I caused such a scene. Some friends say I was right to warn Laura, while others say I should have kept my mouth shut and let the wedding go on. I feel like I'm caught between two conflicting duties, protecting my sister from potential harm and respecting the sanctity of her wedding day. I honestly did not expect the fallout to be this severe, and I'm not sure if I handled the situation poorly or if Laura and Mark are being unreasonable. So, Reddit AITA for telling my sister the truth about what I overheard, even though it ended up creating a massive scene at her wedding. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. AITA for refusing to let my sister's boyfriend stay at my house for 2 weeks despite her insisting it's no big deal. I, 32F, live in a small 2-bedroom apartment in a bustling city. My sister, Emma, 29F, recently started dating a guy named Alex. I've met him a few times at family gatherings, and honestly, he seems fine on the surface, polite, charming, and always smiling, but I've noticed some things that made me hesitant about him. He tends to dominate conversations, constantly interrupts people, and subtly insults or undermines my sister when he thinks no one is paying attention. I tried to ignore it first, thinking maybe I was overreacting, but a few incidents left me uneasy. A couple of weeks ago, Emma called me in a panic. She had a work trip come up unexpectedly and asked if Alex could stay at my apartment while she was gone. She insisted it was just for 2 weeks, that he was super respectful, and that I shouldn't worry. I explained that my place is really small and I wasn't comfortable having a stranger live here, even if it was only temporary. Emma reacted with obvious frustration, saying I was being ridiculous and overly dramatic. She reminded me that I'd let her friends crash before and that Alex isn't any different. I tried to reason with her calmly. I told her that friends are one thing, but someone you're dating is a different story. I reminded her of the things I had noticed about his behavior and said that I didn't feel comfortable having him in my personal space for an extended period. She accused me of being judgmental and said I was overreacting based on one bad impression. The conversation quickly escalated. Emma started crying over the phone, saying that I was being selfish and that I had always been unsupportive of her relationships. I felt guilty, but still didn't want to compromise my boundaries. I offered alternatives. I could help her find a short-term rental, a cheap Airbnb, or even a friend who might host him, but she refused. According to her, I was the only viable option because I lived closest to her office and she had no one else she could trust. A few days later, she showed up at my apartment unannounced with Alex. She was sobbing, saying she couldn't believe I was making her choose between her boyfriend and me. I reminded her again that my apartment isn't suitable for this and that I still wasn't comfortable. She begged, pleaded, and then started yelling, accusing me of being controlling and cruel. Alex was quiet mostly, but he kept glancing at me with what I can only describe as a smug grin, like he knew he was testing me. At this point, I told her firmly that no, he could not stay. I offered to help carry his luggage back to her car and even offered to order him food to eat elsewhere while she figured out other arrangements. She left angry, claiming I had ruined her life and that I was acting like a selfish monster. My parents got involved shortly afterward. They were shocked that I refused, but after I explained everything, they seemed to side with me. My dad said he respected my boundaries, and my mom said she understood why I felt uncomfortable. Emma, however, hasn't spoken to me since. She sent a long text saying I was unbearable and that our relationship would never be the same. She called me cruel for prioritizing my comfort over her relationship. Meanwhile, Alex posted a vague story on social media hinting that some people cannot handle kindness and hospitality, which I assume was directed at me. I feel like I'm in the right because I did not invite him into my home. I was honest about my discomfort, and I even offered alternatives. But the fallout has been awful. My parents are trying to mediate, but Emma is refusing to respond to calls or texts. I've had friends say I should just let him stay and avoid drama, but I genuinely do not want someone living in my apartment who I barely know, especially when there are red flags in his behavior. I keep replaying the events in my head, wondering if I could have handled it differently. Maybe I should have just let him stay for the sake of family harmony, or maybe I could have agreed to a shorter stay, like a night or two. On the other hand, I feel like giving in would have set a precedent that my boundaries are negotiable, which I really don't want. So Reddit, AITA for refusing to let my sister's boyfriend stay at my apartment, even though she insisted it was no big deal, and now refuses to speak to me. AITA for refusing to let my friend stay with me indefinitely after she said she was in a rough patch. I, 34F, live alone in a modest 2-bedroom apartment that I rent in the city. I've worked hard to maintain financial stability and independence. I like having a quiet, organized home where I can control my routine, and I've always been careful about who I allow to stay with me long term. I value my personal space and mental well-being, and I've learned from past experiences that letting someone move in, even temporarily, can spiral into unexpected complications. My friend, Claire, 32F, has been a close friend for about 10 years. She's intelligent, funny, and talented, but she's also historically had financial instability and a tendency to make impulsive decisions. She's been through several short-lived living arrangements and has often relied on friends or family when things didn't work out. I've always tried to support her in reasonable ways, helping her move, occasionally lending small amounts of money, or giving advice, but I have boundaries, especially regarding my home. A few months ago, Claire called me in a panic. She had recently lost her apartment due to her landlord evicting her for non-payment of rent. She explained that she was in a rough patch and asked if she could stay with me temporarily while she got back on her feet. She promised it would only be for a week or two, that she would be respectful, pitch in for groceries and utilities, and make herself as low maintenance as possible. Out of concern and sympathy, I agreed, thinking this would truly be short-term. The first few days were fine. Claire was polite, mostly stayed in the guest room, and made an effort to keep the apartment tidy. But by the end of the first week, I began noticing small issues. She left her clothes in the living room, used my kitchen extensively without asking, and started leaving dishes in the sink. I reminded her gently that the apartment is small and that we needed to keep things organized. She apologized and said she would try harder, which seemed to work for a few days. 2 weeks in, she told me she still hadn't found a new apartment because her applications were being denied or were too expensive. She implied she might need to stay a bit longer, perhaps a month or more. I explained firmly that my apartment is small and I cannot host someone indefinitely. I suggested alternatives. She could stay with another friend temporarily, look into short-term rentals, or consider a hostel or Airbnb while she searched for housing. She dismissed all of these options, insisting that staying with me was the only reasonable solution. By the 3rd week, her behavior had changed. She began leaving clothes and personal items scattered throughout the apartment, using my bathroom products without asking, and frequently leaving lights and appliances on. She also borrowed my laptop without permission. I repeatedly reminded her of the boundaries we had agreed upon, but she acted annoyed and framed my requests as harsh or unsupportive. She argued that since she had nowhere else to go, it was reasonable for her to rely on me. Then she crossed the line. Claire invited one of her friends over without telling me, and they spent several hours in my apartment, leaving a mess. I confronted her immediately, telling her this behavior was unacceptable and that she needed to leave within a week. She reacted badly, crying and saying I was being heartless and selfish. She accused me of abandoning her when she needed me most, and tried to guilt me by reminding me of all the times she had been there for me in the past. I reminded her that supporting someone does not require compromising my home, finances, and mental health. During this time, our mutual friends started weighing in. Some criticized me for not helping a friend in crisis, while others agreed that my boundaries were reasonable. I also noticed that Claire had started posting on social media about her difficult situation and implying that I was unsupportive, which made me feel even more stressed and anxious. After the week I set for her departure, Claire finally found a short-term sublet and moved out, but the tension between us is still palpable. She occasionally brings up the situation and frames me as cold or uncaring, while I feel conflicted. On one hand, I wanted to help her and did so initially. On the other hand, I believe it was completely reasonable to refuse long-term accommodation in my home. I tried to help her in other ways, offering advice, helping her look for housing, and providing temporary assistance, but she seemed to view these efforts as insufficient. I've reflected extensively on the situation. I feel guilty because I know she was in a tough spot and genuinely needed help. But I also know that allowing her to stay indefinitely would have jeopardized my financial stability, independence, and mental well-being. I value my space and privacy, and I feel that maintaining these boundaries is crucial for healthy relationships. I worry about the impact on our friendship long-term, but I also feel that standing firm was the right thing to do. I love Claire and want to remain friends, but I cannot compromise my home or peace of mind to accommodate someone who refuses to take responsibility for themselves. Saying no was difficult but necessary. I feel conflicted about the lingering tension and occasional judgment from mutual friends, but I also feel justified in protecting my boundaries. So, AITA for refusing to let my friend stay with me indefinitely after she said she was in a rough patch and initially promised it would only be temporary. AITA for refusing to host my niece's wedding after her fiancé made a very unusual demand. This started about 6 months ago when my sister called me out of the blue. She was ecstatic and wanted to tell me that her daughter, my niece Emma, was engaged. I congratulated her and told her I was thrilled, and she immediately jumped into wedding planning mode. She mentioned that Emma and her fiancé, Ryan, wanted to have the wedding at my house. I was taken aback because, while we have a decent-sized backyard and a large living room, my house is not a wedding venue. I live in a modest suburban home, and I've hosted small family gatherings, but never anything on the scale of a wedding. I politely suggested that maybe a local hall or a park might be more appropriate, but my sister insisted. She said Emma really wanted an intimate, homey feel for the wedding, and that my house would be perfect. At first, I was hesitant but willing to consider it. Then came the real shock. Ryan, Emma's fiancé, told me that he wanted to have the wedding without my husband and me interfering in any planning. That might have been reasonable if it were just general planning, but he went further. He said that he didn't want us to have any say over catering, decoration, or guest list, and that he didn't want my husband present during the ceremony itself because he didn't vibe with his energy. I was stunned. I asked him to clarify, and he explained that he felt my husband was too controlling and rigid, and that he wanted the wedding to have a free-spirited energy. My husband has always been a calm and reserved person who's never imposed his opinions on anyone's events, so this accusation felt not only untrue but absurd. I tried to reason with them. I explained that hosting a wedding in our house would inevitably involve us to some degree. We would need to accommodate extra bathrooms, parking, food preparation, safety concerns, and so on. They insisted they could handle it themselves. Then Ryan added another stipulation. He wanted to bring in a large outdoor tent, a band, and at least 150 guests. I live on a quiet street, and having that many people would create chaos, possibly violate local noise ordinances, and leave me scrambling to maintain some semblance of order. I tried to explain this, but he brushed it off, saying, "You're just overthinking. It'll be fine." At this point, I realized this wasn't going to be a collaborative effort. It would be an imposition. I spoke to my sister privately and told her I didn't feel comfortable hosting the wedding under these conditions. She tried to guilt me by saying that Emma had dreamed of getting married at our house since she was a little girl, and that my refusal would break her heart. I understand the sentimental value, but I also feel like my home is my sanctuary, and the idea of turning it into a venue for 150 people while being told to stay out of it felt more like a hostage situation than a celebration. I offered alternatives: a smaller backyard, wedding for 50 guests, using our house only as a location for photos, or helping them find a local venue. All of these options were rejected. Ryan and Emma insisted it had to be my house, at full scale, and without our interference. I asked them why they were so adamant about our house, and Emma said it was because she and her friends loved our backyard for its aesthetic and nostalgic value. But the logistical nightmare of accommodating that many people just seemed impossible. Eventually, I firmly told them no. I said I would not host the wedding and that they needed to find a venue elsewhere. My sister got angry and said I was being selfish and ruining Emma's special day. Ryan texted me calling me controlling and stubborn and said that if I didn't host the wedding, it would taint the entire family dynamic. Emma didn't talk to me for a week after that. I understand that weddings are emotional and that young couples could be idealistic, but I feel like they were asking for something unreasonable. My house isn't a commercial space, and I don't feel obligated to turn my life upside down for a single day, especially when the people involved are treating my family as though we're obstacles rather than hosts. The tension has gotten worse over time. My sister and Emma have been sniping at me during family gatherings. Ryan has refused to come to any holiday dinner where my husband is present. I feel like I made the right choice for my mental health and to preserve my home, but I also feel guilty. Was I really being unreasonable, or am I right to protect my space and boundaries? I'm curious if others think I overreacted. I haven't spoken to Ryan or Emma in detail since my refusal, and while my sister continues to pressure me subtly, I'm standing my ground. AITA for refusing to host my niece's wedding after her fiancé made these demands. AITA for refusing to let my brother's kids live with me, even though he's going through a rough patch. I, 32F, have always been the responsible sibling in my family. I have a stable job, a comfortable apartment, and I've built a fairly structured life for myself. My younger brother, Mark, 28M, on the other hand, has always been a bit reckless. He's had some good jobs, but nothing long-term, and he has a habit of making impulsive decisions that usually land him in hot water. We've had plenty of disagreements over the years, mostly about his lifestyle choices, but I've always tried to be supportive when it came to major issues, especially when it involved his kids. Mark has 2 children, Lily, 8F, and Ben, 5M. Their mother, Julia, passed away when Lily was 2 and Ben was just a baby. Mark has been the primary caregiver ever since, though he hasn't exactly had an easy time balancing work and parenting. I've helped out whenever I could, babysitting, paying for things he couldn't afford, and basically acting as a second parent in many ways. Recently, Mark's life hit a rough patch. He lost his job after some conflicts with his manager, and then his apartment lease was up, leaving him scrambling for housing. He called me last week, sounding desperate. He said he didn't have anywhere to go and that he wanted to move his kids in with me temporarily until he got back on his feet. At first, I was sympathetic. I said I needed to think about it because my apartment isn't huge and I wanted to make sure I could manage it without completely disrupting my routine. After thinking it over, I realized that taking in 2 kids full-time would be incredibly disruptive for me. My job is demanding, and I work long hours, often from home. My apartment has only 1 bedroom and a small living space. I could maybe manage 1 kid for a short time, but 2 for an indefinite period would be overwhelming. I also have pets, which Mark's kids are allergic to. And there's the financial aspect. Groceries, school supplies, and daily expenses would fall on me entirely if he's not contributing. When I told Mark that I couldn't have the kids living with me, he was shocked. He said I was being selfish and that family is supposed to stick together, especially in hard times. He said that I had helped him before with babysitting and small loans, so I owe him this. I explained all of the reasons I couldn't take them in, the lack of space, my work schedule, the allergies, and the financial strain, but he kept insisting that it was just temporary and that I could figure something out. I suggested alternative solutions. He could reach out to local family services, ask friends for short-term housing, or even consider a co-living arrangement where he rents a small apartment nearby. I even offered to babysit a few nights a week to give him a break, but he seemed to interpret this as me being unwilling to help at all. The conversation escalated when Mark accused me of not caring about his kids. He said that if I loved them, I would do whatever it takes to help them, and that I was prioritizing my own comfort over their well-being. I reminded him that I've spent countless hours helping him in the past, and that refusing to let them live with me doesn't mean I don't care. It means I have boundaries and limitations. He then brought up our parents, saying that they would be disappointed in me for not stepping up. This hurt because my parents have always respected my independence and decisions, and I felt like he was twisting the situation to make me feel guilty. Since then, Our relationship has been tense. My parents reached out and told me they understand my reasoning, but urged me to consider some compromise. My friends are split. Some say I'm being reasonable, and others think I should just sacrifice a little for family. I've tried to find other ways to help without taking on full-time custody of the kids, but Mark keeps pressuring me, and now I'm worried our sibling relationship might suffer irreparably. I know that Mark is in a tough spot and that the kids are innocent in all of this, but I also know that taking them in would completely disrupt my life and could potentially create resentment and stress that wouldn't benefit anyone. I feel like I'm doing my best by helping in ways that I realistically can, but Mark seems to see it as insufficient. So, AITA for refusing to let my brother's kids live with me, even though he's going through a rough patch. AITA for refusing to let my brother and his kids stay with me indefinitely after his divorce. I, 35F, live in a modest 3-bedroom house that I own. I live alone, aside from my cat, and I've worked hard over the years to maintain my independence and financial stability. I enjoy having control over my space, routines, and finances, and while I care deeply about family, I am very protective of my personal boundaries. My younger brother, Alex, 33M, recently went through a difficult divorce. He has 2 children, ages 6 and 8, and the divorce left him struggling financially. A couple of months ago, he called me in a panic, explaining that his ex-wife had taken the house, and he had nowhere to go while trying to find a new apartment. He asked if he and the kids could stay with me temporarily until he got back on his feet. Out of sympathy, I agreed, but I made it clear that temporary meant no more than 2 or 3 weeks. I also asked that he help with household chores, contribute to groceries, and respect my personal space. The first week was fine. The kids were excited to be at my house, and Alex seemed grateful. He followed the rules I set, and I felt like I was helping a family in need. However, by the second week, cracks began to show. He brought over more belongings than necessary, leaving them stacked in the guest room and living room. The kids were energetic, which was understandable, but they began leaving toys and clothes around the house. Alex also started skipping chores and didn't contribute to groceries consistently, despite my repeated reminders. By the 3rd week, it became clear that his new apartment wouldn't be ready for at least a month, and he started hinting that he might need to stay even longer. I reminded him of our original agreement and said that hosting him indefinitely wasn't feasible. I suggested alternatives, such as short-term rentals, staying with other relatives, or exploring temporary housing assistance programs. Alex insisted my house was the only viable option. He said that since I had a spare bedroom, it was reasonable for him to stay, and that family should stick together no matter what. The situation escalated quickly. Alex began acting as though my home was his. He left laundry in the living room, didn't clean the kitchen after cooking, and left the kids unsupervised in ways that disrupted my routine. His stress and frustration began spilling over into the household, and I felt constantly on edge. I repeatedly reminded him that I loved him and wanted to help, but I could not house him and his children indefinitely. I explained that my independence and financial stability were at stake. Alex's response was defensive. He accused me of being selfish and uncaring. He said that if I truly loved my family, I would make sacrifices and allow him to stay until he got back on his feet. He also argued that having a spare bedroom meant I should have no objection to housing him and the kids. I stayed firm, saying that my spare room is not a blank check and that I cannot compromise my own life for an indefinite period. The tension affected the children too. While I loved them, their presence became overwhelming. They started asking for constant attention, leaving messes everywhere, and interrupting my work and daily routines. Alex didn't enforce rules consistently, and I felt like I was being put in the role of parent, which I never agreed to. After about 5 weeks, I had a serious conversation with Alex. I told him that he needed to leave within 2 weeks because I could not continue living under these conditions. He became emotional, saying I was abandoning him and the kids, and that I didn't care about family. He even said I was prioritizing my comfort over his well-being. I reminded him that I had already gone above and beyond by letting him stay initially, and that I had offered help in other ways, such as assisting with finding rentals, helping with moving, and providing advice on budgeting and childcare. Alex eventually found a short-term rental and moved out, but our relationship has been strained ever since. He occasionally brings up the situation, implying that I was cold or unsupportive. Some family members have expressed disappointment with me, saying I should have done more, while others agree that my boundaries were reasonable. I feel conflicted. I wanted to help, and I did so within reasonable limits, but I also had to protect my home, finances, and mental health. I've reflected extensively. I realized that helping someone doesn't have to mean sacrificing one's own stability indefinitely. I tried to assist Alex in practical ways without putting myself at risk, but he seemed to view any limits as a lack of love. I feel guilty for the strain on our relationship, but I also know I did what was necessary to maintain my independence and well-being. I love my nieces and nephew and want to remain a part of their lives, but I cannot allow myself to be responsible for someone else's housing problems indefinitely. I believe my actions were fair and responsible, but I also understand why Alex and some family members might feel hurt or upset. So, AITA for refusing to let my brother and his children stay with me indefinitely after his divorce, even though they were in a difficult situation. AITA for refusing to let my sister's fiancé bring his dog to our wedding, even though it's causing a huge family rift. So, here's the situation. I, 28F, am getting married in about 4 months, and the planning has been a roller coaster from the start. My sister, Emily, 30F, is my maid of honor, and she's always been incredibly close to me. We have our occasional disagreements, but we've always been tight. Lately, though, tensions have risen, and it all centers around her fiancé, Mark, 32M, and his dog, Baxter. Mark and I don't have the best relationship. He's generally polite, but comes across as very self-centered, and he doesn't take family traditions seriously. He's also very attached to Baxter, a rather large, energetic golden retriever. Emily and Mark adopted Baxter a year ago, and he's basically treated as their child. Normally, I'm fine with pets, and I love dogs. I've had dogs all my life, but I also know how chaotic they can get, especially in large social settings. When Mark and Emily got engaged, I started planning the wedding and let them know my vision for the day. I have a small, intimate ceremony planned around 80 people, mostly family and close friends. I have my heart set on having it outdoors in a botanical garden, and I've been very specific about what I want. No pets were included in my plans. I mentioned that I wanted the day to be focused on people, and I was worried that a dog might cause stress with guests who have allergies, fears, or just the potential for accidents. I also considered that the venue has a strict no-pet policy, which I thought would make it clear that this wasn't negotiable. Emily and Mark seemed okay at first, but a few weeks ago, Emily casually mentioned, "Oh, by the way, Baxter is coming to the wedding, right?" I laughed nervously and said, "Actually, I'm really sorry, but the venue doesn't allow pets, and I'd like to keep the ceremony human only. I hope you understand." Emily's face fell, and Mark's expression immediately hardened. Mark insisted that Baxter was part of their family, and how could I possibly have my wedding without my family there? He started going on about how he's been training Baxter to behave in formal settings, and that the dog could walk down the aisle with him, maybe even as a ring bearer. I tried to explain that this wasn't about how well-trained Baxter was. It was about logistics, allergies, guest comfort, and venue rules. Mark got visibly frustrated and said I was being unreasonable and overly controlling. Emily tried to mediate, saying, "Can't you just make an exception for him? It's only a few hours, and it would mean so much to Mark." I explained that even if we tried to make an exception, it would violate the venue rules, and I didn't want to risk them being fined or turned away. I also pointed out that some of our elderly relatives have severe dog allergies, and having Baxter there could put them at real risk. Emily then started crying, saying that I was picking Mark over her and not respecting her family. I was floored. I told her, "Emily, I'm trying to respect everyone, but this is my wedding. I have to make decisions that work for me, too." From that point on, the tension between us has been palpable. Emily has been sending me passive-aggressive texts. Mark has been making snide comments during family gatherings, and my mom has even called me asking if I could just compromise a little. My fiancé, Alex, 29M, supports me 100%, saying that this is my wedding and we need to stick to our plans. The drama escalated when Emily told some relatives that I'm pet phobic and refusing to let Mark celebrate with his family. I clarified with family privately that it's not about fear of dogs. It's about rules, allergies, and ensuring everyone's comfort. But now it feels like my side is being painted as the villain. I try to suggest alternatives, like having a small pre-wedding photo shoot with Baxter or including him in the rehearsal dinner. But Mark insists that nothing can replace him being there during the ceremony. Emily and Mark have now threatened that if Baxter isn't allowed, they might skip parts of the wedding, or worse, not come at all. This has put me in an incredibly stressful position. I don't want them to miss my wedding, but I also feel like bending the rules for them sets a precedent that could ruin the day. I also feel guilty because my sister is clearly upset, but I keep reminding myself that this isn't a minor whim. It's a major venue policy and safety concern. I've spoken with a few friends who have weddings coming up, and most of them agree with me that allowing pets can be chaotic, especially in a formal setting. My fiancé keeps asking me to stay firm, but every time I tell Emily and Mark no, it feels like I'm tearing my family apart. So here's where I stand. I am refusing to allow Baxter at the ceremony because of venue restrictions, allergies, guest comfort, and general wedding logistics. I've offered alternatives to include him in other ways, but Emily and Mark refuse them. Now our family is divided, and I'm hearing whispers that I'm too controlling or not family-oriented. AITA for standing firm and refusing to allow my sister's fiancé's dog at my wedding, even though it's causing a huge family rift. AITA for confronting my sister about her parenting choices. I, 32F, have always been the type of person who tries to be very observant and careful in social situations. I like to avoid drama, and I pride myself on being a good listener and supporter to my family. My younger sister, Emily, 28F, has always been a bit more impulsive and outspoken, and we've had our fair share of disagreements over the years. Lately, however, things have reached a point where I feel compelled to speak up, even though I know it might cause a rift. I'm struggling with whether I did the right thing, and I need an outside perspective. Emily has a 4-year-old son, Lucas, who is an incredibly bright and energetic kid. I love him like my own, and I often babysit when Emily has work obligations or social events. Lately, though, I've noticed some patterns in her parenting that have really concerned me. Emily has always been a firm believer in letting kids figure things out and free-range parenting, which I generally respect in principle, but some of her choices seemed, frankly, dangerous. For example, she lets Lucas play unsupervised in the front yard, which is by a moderately busy street. She also allows him to climb furniture, walls, and playground equipment without consistent guidance or rules about safety. Beyond physical safety, I've noticed some behavioral patterns that worry me. He often acts out in public, screams at strangers when he doesn't get his way, and Emily responds by either laughing it off or threatening him with extreme punishments later, sometimes for minor infractions. About 2 weeks ago, Emily invited me over for a weekend brunch. Lucas was particularly energetic that morning, running around and climbing on furniture while Emily was talking on the phone. At one point, Lucas fell from chair and scraped his knee. I rushed over to help him, and he was crying and obviously in pain. Emily seemed more annoyed than concerned, telling him to get over it, and then returning to her conversation. I helped clean him up and comforted him, but the incident stayed in my mind all day. Later that evening, Emily mentioned she was planning to take Lucas to a local amusement park by herself. She was excited about it, saying she wanted him to have fun and learn independence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the risks she was ignoring, and I realized I had to say something. The next morning, I went to her house and asked if we could talk privately. I started gently, saying I understood and respected her parenting style, but I had noticed some behaviors and situations that seemed unsafe for Lucas. I mentioned the front yard playing near the street, the climbing incidents, and the screaming outbursts, explaining how they might be harmful physically and emotionally. I also suggested that maybe she could set some clearer boundaries and supervision guidelines, especially in public or high-risk situations. Emily's reaction was explosive. She accused me of judging her and trying to control her life, and said that Lucas was fine and that I was overreacting. She said I was undermining her authority as a parent and that she didn't need lectures from anyone, including me. I tried to keep calm and reassured her that I wasn't trying to criticize her personally, only to express concern for her son. She didn't want to hear it, and the conversation escalated to yelling and insults. She eventually told me I was not welcome in her house for a while and hung up on me. Since then, our family has been split. My parents have been cautious, trying not to take sides, but I can tell they're quietly concerned. Emily's friends who know me have expressed support for my intentions, but also say I might have overstepped. I've tried to reflect on my actions, asking myself whether I really had the right to confront her directly. I wanted to protect Lucas, and I felt responsible in the moment, but I also recognize that Emily is his mother and ultimately makes the decisions. I'm conflicted because part of me believes that if something serious happened, I could never forgive myself for not speaking up. On the other hand, I'm aware that my intervention may have damaged my relationship with my sister, and that could have long-term consequences for both of us and for Lucas. I have considered writing her a letter apologizing for the confrontation, but still expressing my concerns. But I worry that might reopen the argument or make her feel attacked again. I also have some friends who are parents, and they have different opinions. Some think I was right to speak up because a child's safety should never be compromised, while others think I should have waited and approached the issue more delicately or through another family member. I honestly don't know if I crossed the line, and I'm struggling to determine whether I was truly in the wrong, even though my intentions were to protect Lucas. So, Reddit AITA for confronting my sister about her parenting choices? I feel like I was trying to act responsibly, but I also don't want to cause permanent damage to our relationship or make her feel attacked for her personal decisions. Hey friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. AITA for refusing to babysit my niece and nephew because of my brother's parenting style. I, 28F, have a younger brother, Jake, 25M, who has two kids, Lily, 5F, and Max, 3M. My brother and his wife, Sarah, 24F, have always been very hands-off with discipline. I mean, I get that every parent has their own style, but they let the kids do basically whatever they want. No timeouts, no consequences, constant screen time, and when the kids act out, they usually just give in to avoid conflict. It's exhausting to watch, honestly. A few months ago, Jake and Sarah asked me to babysit Lily and Max for a weekend. I had been hesitant because of their parenting style, but I also wanted to help out, so I agreed. What I didn't expect was how out of control the kids could be when left to their own devices. They screamed, threw toys, refused to eat anything that wasn't sugary, and fought over literally everything. When I tried to get them to behave, my brother would call me from work to check in, and I could hear him laughing in the background while the kids yelled and ran around. I felt like I was supposed to magically control them, but the rules they had at home were non-existent. By the end of the weekend, I was completely drained. My apartment looked like a war zone. The kids had eaten nothing but candy and snacks, and when I tried to suggest bedtime routines, Lily threw a tantrum for 45 minutes. I told my brother and Sarah honestly that I didn't think I could babysit again unless they were willing to give me some structure to work with. They got defensive and said I was being too strict and ruining the kids' fun. Since then, I've been avoiding babysitting. Every time they ask, I make excuses about being busy or tired. My parents think I should step up and help because they're my brother's kids, but honestly, I don't feel comfortable managing them the way their parents do. Recently, Jake asked me again to watch Lily and Max for a weekend because he and Sarah wanted to go out of town. I told him no, explaining that I couldn't handle the kids with no rules, and that I wouldn't feel right letting them run wild in my home. He got angry and accused me of being selfish and not family-oriented. Sarah chimed in, saying that I was just looking for an excuse not to spend time with their kids. My parents have since called me, telling me that I'm overreacting and that I should help family out when needed. I get that they're my family and that it's nice to be there for them, but I feel like I'm being asked to do something I'm not equipped for. I don't want to damage my relationship with the kids, but I also don't want to subject myself to a weekend of chaos. I've offered to do short visits or take them out for a few hours during the day, but they insist that I should be willing to babysit for full weekends. Some friends say I'm justified, but others tell me I should put my feelings aside for my family. I really feel stuck because I don't want to be seen as the bad aunt, but I also don't want to be drained and frustrated every time I help out. So, AITA for refusing to babysit my niece and nephew because of how my brother and sister-in-law parent them. Background context I haven't mentioned yet. I have experience with kids, including working as a summer camp counselor for several years and babysitting for neighbors and friends. I know how to handle children who act out, but I also know that consistency is key, and without any rules in place, even my experience doesn't help much. I have tried discussing specific strategies with Jake and Sarah, like setting clear boundaries, limiting screen time, and enforcing consequences for bad behavior. I even suggested a trial weekend where I could implement these methods with their cooperation. They completely dismissed all suggestions, saying that the kids should be free to express themselves and not be stifled. Another complicating factor is that my apartment isn't very kid-proofed. I have breakable items, cords, and furniture that isn't safe for a 3-year-old running around. When I suggested they bring some of the kid-safe toys from home, they refused, saying I should accommodate them the way they are. I feel like I'm expected to bend over backward for kids who are basically wild in my own space. I also want to clarify that my refusal isn't permanent. I am open to helping if they are willing to follow some basic rules, or if we can create a system where the kids have some structure. But every time I bring this up, Jake and Sarah accuse me of trying to change their kids, or be the disciplinarian, which is not my goal. I just want to maintain a safe, manageable environment for everyone. Since saying no this last time, our family gatherings have become tense. Jake has made passive-aggressive comments about me, not caring about the kids, and my parents seem disappointed. I feel like if I agree to babysit under these conditions, I will resent them, and that resentment could affect my relationship with my niece and nephew. So far, my plan is to keep suggesting short visits and supervised outings rather than full weekends. I'm trying to reinforce boundaries while still maintaining some involvement in their lives. However, the pressure from my brother, sister-in-law, and parents makes it emotionally exhausting. I genuinely love Lily and Max, and I want to be part of their lives, but I also need to respect my limits. I feel like my refusal isn't about the kids themselves, but about the parenting style and the lack of preparation or rules that would allow me to help them safely. I'm curious how other people see this. Am I unreasonable for saying no to full weekend babysitting because of their chaotic behavior and their parents' refusal to set boundaries? I don't want to be the bad aunt, but I also can't sacrifice my well-being every time they ask for help. I understand that family sometimes requires compromise, but I feel like compromise should be a two-way street. I've offered solutions, but none are accepted, and now it seems that my only options are either endure a stressful weekend or completely distance myself from the kids, which doesn't seem fair to anyone. So, AITA for refusing to babysit my niece and nephew under these circumstances. AITA for refusing to pay for my cousin's wedding after she said she couldn't afford it. I, 33F, come from a large extended family that is very close-knit. Family gatherings are frequent, and we've always supported each other when possible. That being said, I've always been financially responsible and careful with my money. I live on my own, have student loans and a mortgage, and budget carefully to stay afloat. I am generous within reason, but I have limits. My cousin, Hannah, 30F, got engaged last year. She's been dating her fiancé, Michael, 32M, for about 6 years. Hannah is sweet, but she has a history of overspending and financial instability. She's had to borrow money from family in the past for vacations, events, and emergencies, and she sometimes expects family to help her cover costs she cannot manage herself. A few months after her engagement, Hannah approached me with a delicate topic. She said that she had always dreamed of a big, extravagant wedding, but that she and Michael couldn't afford it. She asked if I would be willing to contribute a substantial amount toward the wedding expenses, framing it as helping her achieve the wedding she had always wanted. She told me that other family members had already pledged support and that my contribution would help cover the remainder of the venue, catering, and photography. I was taken aback. Weddings are expensive, and asking a cousin to fund a large portion of the event felt unreasonable. I explained that while I was happy to contribute a reasonable gift, I could not afford to pay for a significant portion of her wedding. I offered to help in other ways. I could assist with planning, help find cost-saving options, or even help organize some of the DIY elements she wanted, like invitations or decorations. I also offered a modest financial gift within my means. Hannah became upset. She said I was being unsupportive and selfish, and implied that if I truly cared about her and her dream, I would help. She also said that she had sacrificed a lot for me in the past. She had lent me money during college, supported me emotionally during breakups, and helped me with moves. I acknowledged these things, but reminded her that I had always repaid or otherwise returned her kindness, and that my finances are limited. Over the next few weeks, she repeatedly pressured me. She would send long texts about the importance of family helping each other, and how this wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event. She even hinted at feelings of resentment, suggesting that family members who refused to contribute were letting her down. I explained again that my contribution was generous within my means, but she dismissed it as inadequate. The situation escalated when Hannah started telling other family members that I refused to help make her wedding happen. Some relatives reached out to me, expressing disappointment or trying to persuade me to reconsider. I explained my perspective, emphasizing that I had already offered both a financial gift and practical assistance. But Hannah continued to frame me as the villain. I also noticed that her fiancé, Michael, became frustrated with the situation. He said it was unfair to pressure family members for money and that I had done nothing wrong. However, Hannah would often ignore his input and continue trying to guilt me into contributing more. The tension began to affect my mental health. I started feeling anxious whenever I received messages from Hannah or when I saw posts about the wedding. I felt guilty for not meeting her expectations, but also angry that she was pressuring me beyond what was reasonable. I try to maintain boundaries while still being supportive in other ways, but she sometimes ignored my limits and continued to make me feel responsible for her dream wedding. Ultimately, I refused to pay beyond the gift I had already committed to. Hannah was visibly upset and said she was disappointed and hurt, and she has occasionally made passive-aggressive comments in family settings. Since I feel conflicted because I wanted to support her and be part of her special day, but I also know that paying for a large portion of the wedding would have jeopardized my financial stability. I have helped her in ways I could afford, including planning support, researching vendors, and offering gifts, but she seems to see that as insufficient. I've reflected a lot on the situation. I understand why Hannah might feel hurt, but I also believe my boundaries were reasonable. Supporting someone does not mean putting oneself at financial risk, and I feel justified in protecting my stability. I want to maintain a healthy relationship with her, but I cannot give beyond what I can reasonably afford. I feel like my refusal has caused tension in the family, but I also feel that standing firm was necessary for my own well-being. So, AITA for refusing to pay for my cousin's wedding after she said she couldn't afford it and pressured me to cover a large portion of the costs. AITA for refusing to let my younger brother stay at my house after a huge fight over his irresponsible behavior. I, 32M, have always had a complicated relationship with my younger brother, Jake, 28M. Growing up, he was the wild child of the family, constantly getting into trouble and relying on my parents to bail him out. I, on the other hand, was always the responsible one. Good grades, steady job, savings account, the works. I've tried to help him over the years, but I think I've finally reached my limit. To give some context, Jake has struggled with steady employment for most of his adult life. He's bounced between jobs, often quitting or getting fired, and has no real savings. Over the years, he's moved in and out of my parents' house multiple times. My parents, who are now in their 60s, have grown weary of constantly supporting him financially and emotionally. I've always tried to stay neutral, sometimes helping him when I could, sometimes refusing depending on how severe the situation was. A few months ago, Jake had yet another job crisis. He had been working a small retail store, and after a disagreement with his manager, he got fired. He called my parents, who were sympathetic but firm. They told him he needed to figure out his own place and that he couldn't move back in with them. That's when he called me. At first, I was hesitant. My apartment isn't huge, and I live alone, but I know he doesn't have anywhere else to go. I thought maybe I could give him a week or two while he looked for a new job and temporary housing. However, from the very first day, it became apparent that he wasn't interested in being a guest or working toward independence. He was looking for a permanent solution where he could live rent-free. He started leaving his dishes in the sink for days, refusing to do laundry, and spending most of his time on his phone or playing video games. I tried talking to him politely, asking him to at least keep things clean and contribute to household chores, but he would shrug it off or get defensive. A week turned into two into three, and he started expecting me to drive him everywhere, buy groceries, and even pay for his phone bill. The breaking point came when I found out he had invited some of his friends over while I was at work without asking me, and they stayed overnight. My apartment is not designed for parties or extra people, and I was furious. I confronted him, asking why he would think that was acceptable. He responded that I should chill and stop being so uptight, claiming that since he was living there, he had rights too. I told him that living in my apartment came with responsibilities, and if he couldn't meet them, he couldn't stay. He left for a few hours, but then returned late at night, drunk, demanding I let him back in because it's freezing outside and I have nowhere else to go. I refused and told him he needed to find a hotel or a shelter. He got extremely angry, yelling that I was abandoning him and that I was just like my parents, selfish and heartless. We ended up shouting at each other until he stormed out and stayed in his car overnight. The next day, he called my parents, crying and complaining that I had kicked him out and that I was ruining his life. My parents called me, clearly frustrated, and asked if I could be a bit more understanding. I explained everything, emphasizing that he had been disrespectful, unwilling to follow house rules, and was taking advantage of my hospitality. My parents said I was right, but reminded me that he is family, and family should help each other. I agreed in principle, but told them I wasn't willing to compromise my boundaries or let him disrespect me in my own home. Since then, Jake has been posting passive-aggressive things on social media, tagging me in memes about selfish siblings and making vague accusations about me abandoning him. Some friends have reached out, saying that maybe I could have handled it more gently or that I should give him another chance. I honestly feel conflicted because part of me remembers how hard it was when we were kids, and I know he genuinely doesn't have a place to go. But the other part of me knows that if I give in now, it will only reinforce a cycle where he expects others to solve all his problems without taking responsibility for himself. I've considered trying to find a compromise, like offering to pay for a few nights at a hostel while he looks for work or housing, but I worry it won't solve anything in the long term. I also feel resentful because I've sacrificed a lot for him over the years, both financially and emotionally, and it seems like nothing I do is ever enough. So AITA for refusing to let my brother stay at my apartment after he repeatedly disrespected my rules and boundaries. I recognize he's in a tough spot, and I empathize with the situation, but I also feel like enabling him would ultimately hurt him and me. I just want a clear conscience that setting boundaries is not the same as being a bad sibling. Has anyone else been in a situation where helping family might actually be harmful in the long term? I'm struggling to figure out where the line is between support and enabling. AITA for refusing to attend my sister's wedding after she excluded me from major decisions. I, 29F, have always been close with my family, particularly my sister, Emma, 32F. We grew up with a tight-knit bond, sharing secrets, supporting each other through school, and even living together for a couple of years in our 20s. Our parents, divorced since I was 12, have always tried to mediate when conflicts arise, but for the most part, Emma and I have had a good relationship. That changed over the past year as she started planning her wedding. Emma got engaged about a year ago to a man named Tom, 34M, who I will admit I didn't immediately click with. He seemed nice enough, but I felt that some of his opinions about family and traditions were a bit dismissive. I try not to let it bother me because I wanted Emma to be happy. When she first asked me to be her maid of honor, I was thrilled and began offering to help with whatever she needed, planning the bridal shower, dress shopping, vendor research, etc. I wanted to be involved and supportive, as any sister would. At first, things seemed fine. I helped plan the bridal shower and attended all the dress fittings. But as the months went on, I started noticing a pattern. Emma and Tom were making decisions without consulting me, even when I was explicitly involved in the planning process. For instance, when I tried to give input on the catering menu, Emma dismissed my suggestions, saying, "Tom and I have already decided, but we'll think about it." Similar things happened with the color scheme, invitations, and even the playlist for the reception. Every time I offered advice, it was either ignored or lightly acknowledged with no intention to follow through. I tried to stay patient and reminded myself that it was her wedding and she had the right to make her own decisions. However, the breaking point came about 3 months ago when Emma asked me to help with seating arrangements. I expected that, given our history and the fact that I was her maid of honor, she would at least involve me in discussions with family members. Instead, she sent me a spreadsheet with all the guests already seated and asked me to double-check for errors. When I pointed out that she had placed my parents on opposite sides of the venue and asked if we could find a compromise, she replied curtly, "It's already set. Don't worry about it." That felt dismissive and hurtful. The situation escalated further when she asked me to help with a speech. I spent weeks drafting something heartfelt, referencing childhood memories, our relationship, and what I admired about her as a sister. When I sent it to her for feedback, she responded, "It's fine, but you might want to make it shorter." I condensed it, as she requested, and then she sent me a revised version she had written herself, which replaced almost everything I had written. I felt completely sidelined and unappreciated. At this point, I started noticing other patterns. Emma began excluding me from calls with vendors, decision-making meetings, and even group chats with the bridal party. Whenever I tried to speak up, she either brushed me off or implied I was being overbearing. It was particularly painful because I genuinely wanted to contribute and support her, not control anything. I also started hearing from mutual friends that Emma and Tom had made comments about me being too opinionated and hard to please, which felt like a personal attack rather than constructive feedback. Last month, I had a long conversation with her about how I felt excluded. I explained that I was hurt, disappointed, and frustrated that I wasn't being included in decisions, even though I was her maid of honor and had been asking to help. She told me that she appreciated my efforts, but that she and Tom wanted the wedding to reflect their vision, not anyone else's. I told her I understood that, but that it was hurtful to feel like I had no meaningful role in her special day. Emma replied that she needed space and that I should trust them to handle it. After that conversation, I tried to step back and let them make their decisions. I stopped offering suggestions and focused on smaller tasks like helping with minor logistics. But even then, I was met with passive-aggressive comments about how I was doing too much or worrying over nothing. The final straw came last week. Emma texted me with a list of last-minute assignments for the wedding, including setting up decorations and coordinating with vendors, but she also included instructions that explicitly contradicted my earlier efforts. When I pointed this out, she responded, "We've got it covered, just follow the list." I felt completely disrespected, like my contributions didn't matter at all. After much deliberation, I made the difficult decision to decline attending the wedding. I sent her a message explaining that I could not be part of a day where I felt entirely excluded, dismissed, and undervalued, and that I needed to step away from my own mental health. I told her I loved her and wished her happiness, but that I could not pretend everything was fine. Her reaction was explosive. She called me selfish, accused me of holding a grudge, and even implied that I was trying to sabotage her wedding. Our parents and a few family members have reached out, some siding with her, and some understanding my perspective. My friends are mostly supportive, saying that I have the right to set boundaries, but a few are saying I should just show up for her special day and ignore my feelings. I've been feeling a mix of sadness, guilt, and relief. I miss my sister and I wish we could have a healthy relationship, but I also know that attending would make me feel invisible and resentful. I can't shake the thought that she prioritized her fiancé and her control over the wedding above the bond we shared. I don't want this to permanently damage our relationship, but I also feel like my boundaries and feelings matter. So, Reddit AITA for refusing to attend my sister's wedding because I felt excluded and disrespected throughout the planning process. AITA for refusing to help my sister after she deliberately ruined a major event in my life. I, 32F, have always been close with my sister, Emily, 29F, but over the past few years, our relationship has become increasingly strained. Emily has always had a bit of a competitive streak, especially when it comes to family events or achievements. And while I've tried to overlook it, it's reached a point where I feel like I can't trust her around anything important in my life. About 6 months ago, I got engaged to my partner, Alex, 34M. We've been dating for 7 years and had finally decided it was the right time to take the next step. I was beyond excited to start planning the wedding, and I wanted it to be a relatively small, intimate affair with our closest friends and family. I also decided early on that I wanted to take care of most of the planning myself, because I enjoy organizing things and I wanted it to feel personal. However, I did want Emily involved in some capacity because she's my sister and she has a creative side, so I asked her to help with invitations and some decoration ideas. I thought this would be a fun way to bond. At first, Emily seemed enthusiastic. She came up with a few ideas for the invitations and decorations that were fine, though not exactly my style. I tried to guide her gently toward what I liked without discouraging her, because I knew she cared about being involved. The trouble started when we had to choose the venue. I found a beautiful historic and that fit perfectly with the aesthetic I wanted. I told Emily about it and asked if she'd come with me to check it out. She agreed, but the day we went, she completely ignored my opinions. She criticized every aspect of the venue, from the color of the walls to the type of chairs, and insisted we needed something bigger and more impressive to impress people. I tried to explain that the whole point of the wedding was intimacy, not showing off, but she wouldn't hear it. Things stayed tense, but manageable until we got to the topic of the wedding dress. I had found a dress I loved and wanted Emily to see it when I went for my final fitting. I had tried on the dress alone first and sent her pictures to ask for her opinion. She didn't say anything initially, but then she called me while I was at the boutique and started yelling at me. She said the dress was hideous and way too plain for someone like me, that I needed something more elaborate and attention-grabbing. I tried to stay calm and explain that this was my wedding and my choice, but she kept arguing. By the end of the call, I was in tears, feeling like my sister couldn't support me in the one thing that mattered to me. Fast forward to the week of the wedding. I had finalized all the plans and was feeling nervous but excited. Emily came over to help with final decorations and to run last-minute errands. Initially, everything seemed okay, but then she started making small, passive-aggressive remarks. "Are you sure people will like this?" Or, "I can't believe you're really going with these flowers." I brushed them off, but on the day of the wedding, she completely crossed the line. While I was getting ready, Emily went into the room where the invitations were kept and switched the addresses on several envelopes. She also altered some of the RSVP responses, making it look like a few people had declined when they hadn't. This caused massive confusion among the caterers and the venue staff. When I confronted her about it, she just shrugged and said, "I thought you want me to take care of it since I know better." I was livid and in shock. I had trusted her with a small, simple task, and she sabotaged it because she thought she knew better than me. The wedding itself was chaotic. A few guests didn't show up because of the altered RSVPs, and others were double-booked with the wrong seating arrangements. Some of the decorations she insisted on adding clashed terribly with the theme, and several people noticed. Alex tried to stay calm and help me manage the situation, but I could tell he was frustrated too. Emily acted like none of it was her fault and kept insisting I was overreacting for being upset. By the end of the day, I was emotionally drained and disappointed, feeling like my sister had deliberately ruined one of the most important days of my life. Since then, I've avoided contacting Emily, and she's been texting me nonstop, asking for help with her own wedding planning. She's engaged now. She expects me to drop everything and assist her, but I honestly can't bring myself to be involved. I told her no firmly and explained why, emphasizing that I needed space and couldn't trust her with anything significant. She reacted badly, claiming I was being selfish and holding grudges, and that family should help each other. My parents are involved too, and they've taken her side to some extent. They keep telling me to forgive and forget, and that I should help her because she's my sister. My friends and Alex fully support me and agree that Emily's behavior was manipulative and harmful, but the family pressure is making me question myself. I've tried to explain to Emily and my parents that my refusal isn't about being petty. It's about protecting myself from being hurt again. I also think it's reasonable to expect family members to respect your boundaries, especially after such a serious breach of trust. So, AITA for refusing to help my sister with her wedding planning after she deliberately sabotaged mine? I feel torn because part of me wants to maintain some relationship with her, but I also feel like I have to put myself first to avoid being hurt again. AITA for refusing to let my adult daughter move back, and even though she said it would be temporary, I, 45F, live alone in a 3-bedroom house that I bought and have maintained on my own. I have a steady job, pay my bills, and have built my life around having a quiet, stable home. I like having control over my space and my routines, and I've always been very careful about who I let into my home. My daughter, Sophie, 23F, recently graduated from college and had been living in a city about 2 hours away while working her first job. She called me one morning in tears, saying she had been let go from her job unexpectedly and that she couldn't cover rent for her apartment. She asked if she could move back home for just a couple of weeks until she got back on her feet. She promised to be respectful, contribute to groceries, and basically keep to herself. Feeling concerned, I agreed, thinking it would truly be temporary. The first few days went smoothly. Sophie helped out around the house, cooked a few meals, and seemed grateful to be back. But by the end of the first week, I noticed that she had started leaving her clothes in the living room, using my personal items without asking, and spending long periods of time on my computer and in my bedroom. I reminded her gently that she needed to respect my space, and she apologized, saying she would try harder. After 2 weeks, Sophie told me she hadn't found a new job yet and asked if she could stay a little longer, maybe another month. I reminded her that my house isn't set up for long-term guests and that I had agreed to let her stay temporarily. I suggested she look into short-term sublets, extended stay rentals, or even consider living with a friend while she got back on her feet. She became defensive, saying I wasn't being supportive and that I should just let her stay until she figured things out. By the 3rd week, Sophie's presence started to feel intrusive. She would leave dirty dishes in the sink for days, let laundry pile up in the living room, and frequently invited friends over without telling me. She also started borrowing money from me to cover small expenses, even though I had already helped her with groceries and gas. I tried to remain patient, but I began feeling stressed and resentful. I reminded her again that she needed to make plans to move out soon, but she kept insisting that it would only be temporary and that I should be more understanding. Things escalated when Sophie began questioning my rules. She would argue about curfews, tell me I was being controlling about household chores, and make comments like, "You're acting like I'm a stranger," or, "I live here too. Why can't I do what I want?" I explained that living in someone else's home comes with responsibilities and boundaries, and that I had been more than reasonable in my support so far. She became increasingly upset and said I was being cold and unsupportive. At this point, about a month after she moved in, I had a serious conversation with Sophie. I told her that she needed to find alternative living arrangements within 2 weeks, as I could not continue to host her indefinitely. I explained that I love her and want to help, but my home, finances, and mental health could not accommodate her long-term stay. She cried, accused me of abandoning her, and said that I was prioritizing my comfort over her well-being. I reminded her that I had already helped by letting her stay temporarily, assisting her with job applications, and providing groceries and advice. Sophie eventually found a short-term rental and moved out, but the relationship between us has been strained ever since. She occasionally brings up the situation, saying I was unsupportive or cold, and my extended family seems to side with her in some cases. I feel guilty because I wanted to help her, and I did, but I also know that allowing her to stay indefinitely would have disrupted my life and boundaries. I had to balance being supportive with protecting my own stability, and I tried to do so in reasonable ways. I have reflected a lot on the situation. I understand that she was in a difficult position and genuinely needed support, but I also feel that my boundaries were fair and necessary. Supporting someone does not mean sacrificing one's entire home, finances, and peace of mind indefinitely. I offered help in ways that were practical and reasonable without putting myself at risk, and I feel justified in holding firm. I want to maintain a good relationship with Sophie, but I also need to protect my independence and personal space. I feel that my refusal to let her stay indefinitely was necessary, even though it caused tension and hurt feelings. I'm worried about how this will affect our long-term relationship, but I also know that compromising my boundaries would have been harmful for both of us. So, AITA for refusing to let my adult daughter move back in indefinitely, even though she said it would be temporary, and she was going through a tough time. AITA for refusing to attend my sister's wedding because of how she treated my kids. I, 34F, have always been close to my sister, Laura, 32F. We grew up together, went to the same schools, and shared countless memories. But over the past few years, things have become strained, mostly because of her attitude toward my children. I have 2 kids, Emma, 8F, and Max, 5M, and Laura has never really been comfortable around them. She says she likes children, but she's extremely critical of the way I raise mine, and she tends to make passive-aggressive comments whenever they're around. About a year ago, she got engaged to her fiancé, James, 35M. The wedding planning started almost immediately, and I was thrilled at first. I genuinely wanted to be part of her big day, and I assumed she'd want my kids there too, as they're her nieces and nephews' cousins. However, early in the planning, she dropped the bomb. She did not want my children at the wedding. She claimed the venue was too small, that it would be chaotic, and that her friends aren't really kid people. I was taken aback, but I tried to be understanding. I asked if there could at least be a childcare option on-site or a separate room where the kids could be entertained, but she refused. She said she didn't want any kids there at all, and if I couldn't come without them, that was my choice. I was shocked. My children are well-behaved and have attended weddings before. I couldn't understand why she wouldn't even consider making accommodations. I tried to talk to her calmly about it, explaining that the kids are a big part of my life and that excluding them made me feel like she was prioritizing her friends over family. She got defensive and accused me of trying to ruin her wedding and said I was being dramatic. I decided to let it go at that moment, thinking I could still attend without them. Then came the bridal shower. I arrived with Emma and Max in tow, thinking I could at least be supportive. Laura had sent an invitation that explicitly said, adults only, but I hoped maybe she'd understand if the kids were there for a short time. The moment we arrived, she glared at me and whispered in front of her friends, I can't believe you brought them. You know they're not allowed. I immediately apologized and took the kids outside, but the damage was done. The evening was tense, and her friends made little remarks about how stressful kids can be, which made Emma and Max feel unwelcome. Over the next several months, the tension continued. Every conversation about the wedding planning seemed to turn into a debate about my children. She made it clear she didn't want them there, that she didn't want to deal with the drama, and that she would feel embarrassed if they acted out. I offered to hire a professional babysitter, provide entertainment, and even take responsibility for any issues that might arise, but she refused all solutions. As the wedding day approached, I found myself dreading it. I realized that attending without my kids would feel like a betrayal to them and to myself. My children mean the world to me, and I didn't want to make them feel like they weren't important to our family. I also felt deeply hurt that my sister seemed more concerned with appearances and convenience than including her own nieces and nephew. A few weeks before the wedding, I called Laura to explain my decision. I told her I couldn't attend because it would feel wrong to leave my kids out, and that I was deeply hurt by how she had treated them. She exploded. She accused me of being selfish, dramatic, and ruining her wedding with my unreasonable expectations. She even claimed I was trying to punish her for being happy. Our parents tried to mediate, but Laura refused to listen. She said if I didn't attend, I was choosing my kids over family loyalty and that I would regret it. I haven't spoken to her since. My parents are upset, saying I should have made more of an effort, and some relatives have messaged me, asking if I'm overreacting or blowing things out of proportion. My kids are sad that they won't see their aunt get married, but they understand why I made my choice. Emma keeps asking why Aunt Laura doesn't want to see her dance or eat cake with her. It breaks my heart. I keep thinking about whether I could have handled this differently. Could I have attended without my kids and just gritted my teeth for one day? Should I have tried harder to compromise? Or was it unreasonable of me to expect my sister to include them when she had already made her stance clear? I feel caught between wanting to support my sister and protecting my children's feelings. I don't want to be seen as difficult or vindictive, but I also can't ignore the hurt this situation has caused. I want to maintain a relationship with Laura, but right now, it feels impossible. So, AITA for refusing to attend my sister's wedding because she refused to include my children. AITA for refusing to host my younger sister's wedding at my house, even though she says I'm being selfish. I, 34 am, have always tried to be a supportive older brother, but my sister, Emily, 29F, has always had a way of pushing boundaries that leaves me feeling drained. I live in a modest 3-bedroom house in a suburban neighborhood that I've worked really hard to make comfortable and welcoming. It's not enormous, but it's cozy, and I love it. I've never been the type to host massive parties because of both space and personal preference, but I'm always happy to have friends and family over for smaller gatherings. Emily got engaged about a year ago to her fiancé, Mark, 31M. From the start, she told me that she didn't want a traditional wedding venue and instead wanted something intimate and homey. At first, I assumed she meant her parents' house or a rented cabin somewhere, but then she mentioned my house. My initial reaction was hesitant. I told her that while I was flattered that she thought my home would be special for her wedding, I wasn't sure it was practical or feasible. She brushed off my concern, saying it wouldn't be a big deal and that I was overthinking things. Over the next few months, Emily and Mark repeatedly brought up the idea of hosting the ceremony and reception at my house. They painted a very romantic picture, emphasizing that my backyard is so beautiful with the garden and the little lights, and that it would be a dream wedding. I kept trying to explain my limitations. My backyard can maybe fit 30 people comfortably. The driveway doesn't accommodate that many cars, the indoor space is tight, and there are noise ordinances in my neighborhood that prevent loud events past 10 p.m. Every time I mentioned these issues, Emily said I was making excuses and that I was being selfish for not wanting to help her out. Things escalated when Emily told me she had already imagined the guest list. She wanted about 80 people for the ceremony and another 50 for the reception. I calculated in my head that even if we tried to cram people into the house and backyard, it would be unsafe and uncomfortable. I suggested alternatives: renting a small local hall, using a park pavilion, or even having a destination wedding with just the closest family and friends. She rejected all of these, claiming that nothing would feel right except having it at your home, and that any other option would ruin the wedding vibe. The final straw came when she casually mentioned that she had already asked a wedding planner to start organizing the layout for my property. The planner called me to discuss logistics, which felt like a total overstep. I reiterated my concerns and said flat out that I would not host the wedding at my house. Emily immediately got defensive and angry. She accused me of being selfish, unsupportive, and even ruining her special day. Mark stayed mostly silent, but later told me privately that he didn't think it was a good idea either and that he understood my perspective, but he didn't want to confront Emily directly. Since then, Emily has barely spoken to me except to send passive-aggressive texts about how families should support each other and how some sacrifices are worth making for love. I've tried explaining that hosting a large wedding at my house isn't a sacrifice. It's a logistical nightmare and a huge financial and emotional burden. I offered to help in other ways, like helping pick a venue, organizing decorations, or even helping financially in small ways, but she brushed all of it off. She keeps framing my refusal as a moral failing rather than a practical decision. I understand that Emily is excited about her wedding and wants it to be perfect, but I also have to consider my own space, privacy, and neighborhood regulations. If it were a smaller gathering, I might have said yes, but this isn't a 20-person intimate dinner. It's more than 100 people spread across a space meant for maybe half that comfortably. I also don't want to risk complaints from neighbors or potential property damage. Our parents are caught in the middle. They sympathize with Emily, but also understand my position. They've suggested compromise solutions like renting a tent in my backyard or paying for a small hall nearby. But Emily refuses anything that isn't my house. I feel like I'm being cast as the villain simply for saying no to something unreasonable. Friends have weighed in, and it's mixed. Some say I'm absolutely right to set boundaries, while others suggest I should just suck it up for my sister's big day. I've also had people say I could just lock my house doors and only let guests in the backyard, but that seems unsafe and unrealistic with the number of people she wants. I feel guilty because I do want my sister to have a wonderful wedding, but I also can't help feeling resentful that she's framing me as selfish for prioritizing basic practicalities. I've been trying to find a solution that makes everyone happy, but nothing seems acceptable to her except my house being the venue. So, AITA for refusing to host my sister's wedding at my house, even though she says I'm being selfish and unsupportive. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos also. Leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.